afternoon, everyone. This is Danny Bulford with the Mounties for Freedom. Thank you for joining us today. This is episode 1 of the new Mounties for Freedom podcast. I am currently a spokesperson for the group Mounties for Freedom. I was formerly a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I left as a result of the federal mandates and because of my outspoken stance against what the government was doing. Today is January 12th, 2022. Today, I'm going to be joined by a personal friend of mine. Our paths have crossed and prior to all of this, prior to 2020, a couple of times. And since the struggle for freedom has begun, and I've been quite outspoken, this guy has been a real source of strength and encouragement for me. He's very motivating, and he's really helping me stay strong and to continue pushing back against the mandates and what we perceive to be ever encroaching authoritarian type behavior by our federal and even our provincial governments. We've been planning to do this for quite a while. We've been trying to make it happen. We just had to overcome a number of obstacles. But anyways, without further ado, I present to you my dear friend, Richard Huggins. Richard, come on in, please. How are you?
Hey there, dude. Good. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for that very kind introduction.
Well, hey man, it's all true. If it wasn't for people like you, there's been many times where I've been right on that brink of getting out of here. You know, when I see things coming down the pipe from our government, it's very concerning. You know, like just recently with the federal minister announcing the possibility of working with the provinces to make vaccination mandatory across all of Canada just to remain a citizen.
Yeah.
So knowing that I have the support of so many people has been a huge source of strength for me to keep going, even on those dark nights when I've been doubting, like, what have I gotten myself into?
I know the feeling. Thanks for sticking around.
Well, it's I'm committed now. No going back now. So I guess just for the listeners tuning in, could you just give us a brief rundown of your background? Like what's your story, Richard? How did you come into this position, into speaking with me here today?
Yeah, well, I'm a constable with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. My name is Richard Huggins. I'm a real police officer. My regimental number, which is like a badge number, is 59640. So you can check into that. I'm a real person. And I joined the RCMP 10 years ago. So I've been on the force for 10 years now. All my service has been done in British Columbia. I was on general duty for a few years. I did a stint on the bike squad. I went into schools to be a liaison officer. And now I'm with the emergency response team in British Columbia. And on the emergency response team, I'm a sniper. So we have that in common. And it's actually, I think, part of what made me come forward today and want to hop on here. As you know, in ERT, we don't let our buddies go into a situation alone. We always make sure we support them and we don't leave them out there hanging. So I saw you out here and I had to support you. So that's what brought me here today.
Well, that's a great sentiment. And I really appreciate it, man. Like this is not an easy thing to step out into the public and put your name and your face out there. Like I was very apprehensive for that, about that for a number of weeks, like in that inner turmoil, knowing like I got to do something. I can't just sit here and be silent. Like I can't just go hide away and hope that this goes away. You know, on that note, it would, encourage you to know that I have received a significant amount of support from within our program and the RCMP in general. people from all over the country messaging me being like, thank you for saying what I'm thinking. Anyways,
Awesome. That's amazing.
yeah, no, it was, that was after I did that very first interview on Truth Warrior. I was like, oh, what's the reaction going to be like, right? And some of the very first messages I got were from people that I really respect and admire, saying like, man, that's one of the bravest things I've seen anyone do since the beginning of this, like specific to the RCMP. And I was like, whew, I'm on the right path.
Good. Yeah, certainly were.
So curious, I get asked all the time. And so I'll just pitch this question to you. What has been your experience over this last 2 years? Like for me at the beginning, based on what we were seeing, what we were hearing, it sounded to me like, 20+% of the human race is going to get wiped out by this thing. We got it going to lockdown. And, I would say the bulk of 2020, actually, I was adhering to all of the public health measures and doing what I was told, thinking that it was the only way out of this mess. I didn't really start to question things and probably until I would say right near the end of 2020, early 2021. Actually, maybe a bit before that, like I was listening to a lot of people that I trusted already. Like Dark Horse podcast was a trusted source of information of mine. They were kind of dispelling some of the ideas about like masking while you're outside. Being outside is one of the best places to be. Get outside in the fresh air. You're very safe. You don't have to worry. Like the virus is, in their words, they were expressing like very low risk of transmission if you're active outdoors. So I'm curious what you were feeling and believing in the beginning, and then how that transitioned over time to where you are currently standing.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it first started popping up, I think the first I heard of it was probably January, February. I don't watch mainstream media, just I find it's over dramatic a lot. So that's my personal opinion. I typically don't watch it. So I was a little out of touch when things were starting to ramp up. I was in California on a trip in March of 2020. And we got back just before they locked everything down. And I was fortunate enough in that I know someone that's very familiar with public health. They participated in the original SARS outbreak back in the early 2000s. So when this broke out, I was lucky that I kind of had them there, and they kind of told me, okay, this is the procedure, this is what's going to happen. And very early on, I think I probably had 2 days of panic. So I didn't panic when I should have, when everyone else at the beginning was. And then I kind of had a couple days of panic there. And then they kind of assured me of, this isn't as big as they initially thought it was going to be, just based on the numbers alone. Luckily, they had access to some numbers and could interpret those for me. So to be honest, for most of the pandemic, I just did my best to live my life as normal as possible. I was outside lots. I did sanitize my hands quite a bit, though. I will admit that. I got a little guy there, and he had some undiagnosed medical conditions, and the doctors were kind of concerned about some respiratory issues. So I was probably overly sanitizing my hands for a bit there. But like you, I would adhere to all the mask policies. I'd listen. I hated the mask, but I understood that there was a purpose for that. Then fast forward to probably the spring, or maybe the winter of 2021, the talks of the vaccines were coming out. And I don't know much about vaccines, but the little that I did know, for me, I knew I'd never be taking a new vaccine, because you don't know what happens with a vaccine until it's actually put out into the main public and society. So I was always skeptical about that. But everything I kept hearing about the vaccine was safe and effective, safe and effective. Guys at work were talking about how it's safe and effective. And I thought, awesome, this is great. I'm still going to wait, though, because I don't want to be a guinea pig. But anyway, it was probably not until the summer of 2021 when a buddy of mine asked if I was going to be getting the vaccine. And I said, no, I'm just going to be waiting. And he said, oh, is it because of ivermectin? And I'm like, I don't know what ivermectin is. I'm not signing up for a vaccine that's new. And he really opened my eyes. He pointed me in a direction to some alternative information. And from there, I just started reading more, investigating a bit more for myself. And I just kept coming up with more and more questions that weren't being answered in the mainstream media. And I think that just kept propelling itself, or snowballing, whatever you want to call it. And this is where we are today, where I just keep having more questions that aren't being answered by the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, I mean, similar to you, 2020, well, even prior to that, as a police officer, I had switched off of mainstream media for a number of years, right? It just too sensationalized for me, too polarizing. Yeah. And I just wanted to as long as you leave me to be free to live my life as a productive member of society, you live your life. That was the kind of the approach I had taken. But it was becoming evident to me early 2021, is similar to yourself, talk of the new technology. My wife was a little bit skeptical about it at first, and that's when I started to dig into it as well. And then probably maybe spring 2021, so a little bit before the summer, was when I had started to pay attention to other scientists around the world. Like one of the very first videos that I ever watched that made me really question, like, what are we doing with this mass vaccination, was that, Dr. Gerd Vanden Bossche talking about how you don't do this into a pandemic, and that you're asking for a lot of potential problems. And so then we'd have these discussions at work, and some guys were interested in what I was saying. Some people were didn't think that it was. They didn't necessarily believe what I was saying, and they were of that opinion. Like, they're hearing from people in the healthcare community that this is the only way out of this. And so
I'm really glad you brought that up. Sorry, Dave, if I could jump in there for a second.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's one thing I really did wrong, is I stayed quiet, because in my mind, everything was going to sort itself out. Like I said, that person that I know that's well-versed in public health was kind of like, well, this isn't how things are supposed to be going. So I thought, you know what, I'll sit back and people will figure it out eventually. But I think what happened in that time is people got so used to hearing one story, one narrative, and not being challenged another way of thinking, that by the time it came to me and other people kind of asking questions, we were kind of, it was almost too little too late. People were already like, no, we're past that. We were there 6 months ago. This is the truth now. So yeah, kudos to you for speaking up earlier on.
Well, and some of the conversations were really, they were, for just a bunch of TAC guys, they were pretty in depth. And, we don't fit that stereotype that people have, where we're just a bunch of knuckle draggers, right? Like very, a lot of highly intelligent people in our program that are, they're critical thinking, and they want to dig into things for themselves as well. So the conversations were good. It was healthy debate. And, I had made my position at that time clear, like, well, I need to know more about this before I'm going to put myself in that same situation like you were describing. And, and at that time, no one was criticizing each other's decision making, right? Like it was still freedom of choice at that time. And we were all in agreement. Well, you do what you think is best for you, and I'm going to do what I think is best for me. And that was okay. I would say early summer was when, like, I had been really paying attention to the people expressing concerns about the vaccine safety and efficacy. And then that also led me into the early treatment argument. And then that was a major red flag. Probably the biggest one for me earlier on was that, like, that suppression of doctors and scientists, like really, really high quality, highly qualified professionals, some of them the most published, cited experts in their specific fields, right? And people that were intensive care lung specialists that were coming up with these treatment protocols. And I would listen to what they were saying, and then I'd look into it for myself within here in Canada. And yeah, like the same thing that was happening in the United States with the suppression effort was happening here in Canada. The same arguments. Oh, there's insufficient evidence for any of these drugs. Whereas, the people we were listening to were providing tons of evidence in support of it. And then, even talking about acting under that precautionary principle, right? Like these are safe. They're on the WHO's list of most necessary. I don't know the exact wording, but medications, and Nobel Prize winner for its use in human beings. Like, why wouldn't you at least try? So that was what really started to tweak me up. And then of course that led into what the media was doing with their campaign to censor and deplatform people, mainstream and some of the larger social media groups. Government, you'd hear the same thing. So like anytime I've spoken to people, I have always trying to take that approach of like, as an investigator, that earlier on in my career, especially, like your duty is to investigate both sides, right? And to try and weigh the evidence for credibility. And normally you would do that by, well, how is the evidence presented? That's one thing I always paid attention to. What is not just the quantity, but the quality of the evidence, like the detail, things that could be corroborated. And I was overwhelmingly finding that, like, what I was finding when I was really searching for the evidence that would support the official narrative, and I was comparing it to what I was finding from these other doctors and scientists that were questioning and forming the counter narrative, like I've said it many times, it was a no contest, right? Like it was in my mind, it was clear that these are people that are willing to risk their entire professional reputation and careers. They've spent a career in these relative fields, whether it be the scientific side or the medical side. And they're desperately trying to get their message out there that there are warning signals that we need to pay attention to, and there's treatments that we could be using to save people. So I guess I would just put that question to you, like, what was your experience when you were looking at the evidence and weighing the evidence, and what were your main sources of your information?
Yeah, so you bring up some good points there, especially going back to, I know we're a couple TAC guys, why are we talking about investigations? But we do come from an investigating background. And I thought back to the investigations I would be a part of. And if you had somebody that said, trust me on my side of the story, just trust me, believe me, it's true. But then you had someone on the other side arguing something different. That's like, hey, here's everything I have. Look at this piece of evidence, look at that piece of evidence. And then they tell you, but what I don't have, they can acknowledge what they don't have. Mm-hmm. In terms of when we're looking for credibility of a story or what really happened, we're going to go with where we can actually look at hard evidence and be able to provide that. I would consider that person to be more truthful if they can provide everything than someone that says, no, just believe me, just trust me. Especially when we're talking about, let's take Pfizer, for instance. They had to pay a settlement a few years back for $2.3 billion, which incorporated dishonesty. Mm-hmm. Like they had been dishonest to the public. They were being misleading. And now part of what they're saying, we're supposed to just listen to them, and all we're kind of being told is safe and effective, and not being provided with all the details of what makes something safe and effective. And I lost my train of thought there with the other part I was gonna, yeah, part of it too was I just found there were some people you were allowed to ask questions to, and you could get answers from, and other people you weren't allowed to question what they were saying. It was just like, no, we've said this, don't question it. And if you question it, they'd start labeling you as as you've alluded to before, this anti-vaxxer term started spreading like wildfire. And I mean, anti-vaxxer has its purpose, it has its meaning, but it wasn't being used in the context of its proper meaning or purpose. It was being used in a derogatory way to dehumanize a bunch of people, so that if someone did try to speak up about something, they would be labeled as an anti-vaxxer and as someone that couldn't be taken seriously. So I saw a lot of that spreading around. Anyway, I'm getting off topic here.
No, but yeah, so you're alluding to what I was talking about when in the manner that it's delivered, right? Like you said, general vague statements, but not making the evidence behind those claims readily available. And if you question it, immediately on the attack, right? The verbal condescending attacks, just like you said. And then, conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hat, all those kind of, I've heard a number of them. And then you go to the counter narrative side and you have all these highly qualified professionals. And when they speak, they're so reasonable in their delivery, right? Like you got the one side behaving like a total bully, trust me. And if you don't, I'm going to attack you. And then you have this side that's saying like, no, like we can show you where the warning signals are if you'll only listen to us. That was again just one more of those warning signals that I just couldn't ignore, throughout this decision-making process.
Yeah, and you triggered my memory there on that thought I lost. And looking at what they were presenting, it wasn't what they were presenting, it wasn't the information they were presenting, it was how they were presenting it. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at how we conduct investigations and how we look for, objective evidence instead of subjective, it was very similar. The process that we go through is almost like a scientific method. And I found that people that were providing the most detailed information were following the same process that we would be following in a police investigation. Whereas the other people were, like I said, were just saying, no, this is what I say, believe me, without that process behind it.
Well, and so one of the big criticisms that I've been reading about and hearing more recently was, basing all of these public health measure policy decisions on modeling, right? Modeling. And, in the beginning, maybe that's all you had to rely on. But, after wave 1 and wave 2, and subsequent waves, and like you mentioned, your contact within public health, and they had the real numbers that showed that this wasn't as bad as they were originally anticipating. So you can transition from acting based on modeling to actual evidence that you have now obtained, right? Actual like real world information and evidence.
Yes.
And so, yeah. But yet it seems that we've just had this one track mindset of masks, lockdowns, mass vaccination, and there's nothing else that you can bring into the mix that is even acknowledged within the mainstream narrative, until starting to see a little bit of it trickle out now. I think the official narrative is starting to it's cracking. Well, it has for a long time for someone like myself, but it's almost becoming too difficult to hide now that the public health strategy is failed. And especially when you're looking around the country, or you're looking around the world, and even different parts of the United States, who they're taking a different approach, and people are living with this and they're treating it. And yes, they still have it there, but it's much more manageable than what we are doing within as a whole, the amount of damage that we're doing as a whole within our own country. Sorry, go ahead. I kind of cut you off there.
No, that's a good. I was just going to say, in part of my investigating for my own purposes, I looked up some of the influenza pandemic responses. So these were things that were already pre-established before COVID ever hit by provincial governments and federal governments. And if you read through that, what we're doing now is not what they were supposed to be doing, and including the masks, like how masks are worn or what they've been doing. That we haven't followed the book on that. As you know, in ERT, we'll plan for things, and we plan and we practice so that when the actual event hits, we can kind of stick to our training and go through with that. And it was just interesting to me that we've kind of gone off the book. I don't want to say completely, but we've definitely veered from these pandemic responses that the different governments had pre-written.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, just early mid-December, I read that paper by the retired Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond, military. Then he ran the emergency management office out of for the Alberta government for a number of years. And it's titled, for people who want to check it out, Canada's Deadly Response to COVID-19. And he details that exact argument about how we threw the book out on our pre-written plans. We didn't pay attention to our emergency management professionals. We dumped all of the responsibility and the power onto the chief medical officers of health, as opposed to tackling it as a whole, like all the, I hate to use this word because it's so RCMP, but stakeholders, to bring all the stakeholders together, and then each specific stakeholder comes up with a plan, how it affects their particular industry or sector. And so after reading that, I went to the Ontario one and I researched that. And again, just like you said, like masking healthy people was never part of the plan. Lockdowns was never part of the plan. It's even written in there, school closures, things of that nature were only to be reserved for like the most severe classification of a pandemic, something that would be on par with like the infection fatality rate of the Spanish flu in today's world. So like something very severe. Whereas, if you look at the numbers from, well, even within just Ontario, like I think the current COVID-19 falls within the moderate. And I think like, I would have to pull up the table to be able to say exactly what it says, but definitely not warranting the amount of economic and social damage that we've done to our country. And, within employment, relationships, schooling of our children. And the two main objectives actually in that pandemic response plan is to, number one, minimize severe illness and disease, or severe illness and death. And then number two was to minimize the disruption to the rest of society, essentially. And, when you look at the public health measures for the members of the public, it was the main ones that stick out in my mind were respiratory etiquette, like coughing in your elbow, disposing of your tissues properly, and hand washing, staying home if you're symptomatic. Like it was stay home, isolate as best you can if symptomatic. And social distancing was part of it. And full disclosure, it does have in there like encouraging immunization. But I mean, two issues there is like we're talking about influenza, and we've had influenza vaccines around for a very long time. And also, encouraging, not mandating. And the third thing on that was I found in there was matching, ensuring that you're matching the vaccine to the current circulating strain, right? Which seems to be an issue with what we're seeing right now with COVID-19. Like that's with the number of people in the fully vaccinated category that are infected and can even transmit. So with the public, it's been completely, and it's even written in there as well that, it's based on best practices, things that have been studied and recommended by the WHO and lessons learned from previous pandemics. And the most recent one cited in that document, the Ontario Influenza Pandemic Response Plan, was the H1N1 from 2009. What was part of the plan was deploying antivirals from government stockpiles to community pharmacies and distribution centers, developing outpatient care to minimize the impact on hospitalizations. And there was even something in there about outbreak management, like antiviral chemoprophylaxis, like so preventative antivirals as a preventative measure to try and manage when there is an outbreak, right? So all of those things that we have come to learn about today regarding the drugs that shall not be named, they have been used all around the world, even prior to COVID-19, for those specific reasons, right? And treating other diseases. And yet nothing. If you look at the Public Health Canada website, like the standard of care for an outpatient is hydrate, rest, isolate from your family, mask if you're around your family, when it's unavoidable to socially distance, manage your fever as best you can. When it becomes difficult to breathe, you go to the hospital. And
for me, I just ask, like, okay, so if this isn't the plan we're following, what plan are we following? It just seems like I just keep coming up with more questions, and not criticizing or anything. I'm just asking, like, okay, if this isn't what we're following, what's the plan here?
Well, that's it. It's like, again, continually the statements are made. We're acting on the best available science, the best available evidence. It's like, well, where's the evidence to support it? Like, I look for it. It's really hard to find. Like, if you look at what is being used as compared to what's being labeled misinformation when it comes to the treatments, like, well, what's labeled information has like a substantial amount of scientific literature documented about it, much of it peer reviewed, much of it randomized controlled trials, which, being the gold standard. And what they are using has like a tiny, tiny fraction of the evidence of the treatment protocols that you're not allowed to talk about. And even like, if you look at what's being used within ICUs predominantly, or well, at least the number one drug, that was recommended based on Dr. Fauci's recommendation. And in that interview, he had mentioned that it was proven safe and effective in Ebola. And if you actually look at that Ebola study, it was the worst of the four. They actually pulled it because of the 53% mortality rate in the treatment arm with remdesivir. Anyways.
Oh, wow. Okay, I didn't end up looking into that stuff, but there were definitely more questions.
Yes, and so that's, again, I've heard lots of different opinions on both of those things from the medical and scientific community, but when I was just looking into it for myself, like the quantity and the quality of the evidence, like, you're very quick to give this one authorization, but very quick to demonize these ones over here. Why? Now,
yeah, and what I want to say about what I really liked about your videos and stuff is you don't just talk about this stuff, but I like that you walk people through how to find it. So you're basically giving little investigation courses to people, and you show them where you found the information, and you show them how to find it for themselves, so that afterwards they can do that research for themselves and they can teach other people how to do it. So I think that's a really important thing you've been doing, and I think you should keep that up, and just wanted to point that out there. So really good.
Well, that's a big motivator, or a reason why I have taken that approach, is because you can't just spout off and make statements and not back it up, right? So if you're going to make an argument, you better be able to show exactly why you're making that argument. And I think that is what is completely missing from the official narrative, right?
Yeah.
I even know members of the Canadian COVID Care Alliance have put it on the table months that they're willing to have like a public and open debate with our public health officials about the approach that has been taken in the management of in this pandemic, and no one will take them up on it. And I've heard many similar stories like that from the United States as well. And so why not? If you believe in what you're doing, why wouldn't you be willing to at least have a public discussion, right? And then give Canadians the opportunity to make informed decisions based on who they believe is more compelling, right?
Yeah. And I think that's what part of democracy is the individual is supposed to have rights, because the individual is supposed to know what's best for them. And I think that's definitely something that's missing right now in our society, is the individual being able to choose. And like, so not to go off on a little tangent here, but the individual's rights and their ability to choose is a cornerstone of democracy. And democracy is definitely, it's built on trust. That's how we can have leaders of our countries step down without violence. They can do it peacefully because we've established this system of trust where the individual has a say and the individual has protection. Now, if you're removing one of the cornerstones of democracy, which is that the individual has the right to choose, you're kind of losing trust for the rest of that system. Now, how can you have people trust anything else in that system if you've taken away the cornerstone? And I think that's an important thing to factor in here. And another reason why I've come forward is I think if people lose faith in the system and the trust in it, that's when violence can erupt. Because as we see around the world, and if we look back in history, people resort to violence. That's what it comes down to. And we want to prevent that from happening. So we need to show people that a democratic process still works and that it can still be trusted. And in order to do that, we need these open conversations, we need these open debates, and we need transparency. That's my little rant.
No, that's 100% it, man. Like I already have come across and spoken to so many people, like exactly what you said there, right? They're good people, law-abiding people. But they have lost faith in the government, public health, media, so many institutions that now they were supportive of for so long and never questioned ever before. And now they're really, really, like, it's damaging. It's almost damaging to the psyche. And I know even I've experienced that, like thinking like, what can I possibly do when this is the monster that I'm facing right now? But people are feeling, increasingly feeling like they're getting painted into a corner where their safety and the lives of them and their family are at risk. And one thing, I don't remember if I said it or not on that most recent little short video clip I made, pleading with people that were in my position, like, do not fall prey to the provocation, right? Like the hateful comments being said about people like me by the Prime Minister, like, do not give them a reason to validate what they're saying about us, right? We have to remain respectful. We have to remain, firm in standing for our freedom, but respectful and lawful, right? Because I believe they're behaving out of desperation, and perhaps it's a strategic move to try and generate a reaction, so then they can, see, we told you that these people were dangerous. That mentality. Sorry, I got a little bit off topic there as well, but I just
no, absolutely. Like it's you talked about people being backed into a corner, and again, that's another reason why I've tried to be more vocal, is to try to protect lives, because obviously I'm still an active police officer, so there's certain things I can't talk about and I can't go into details. But there have been incidents where police officers have been targeted, because people fear police in times like these. They fear police and they fear military, because they see police officers and military as the ones that are going to come by, take their children away or take them away from their families, lock them up. Police officers are going to be enforcing the law. And when you back someone into a corner and they no longer have faith or trust in democracy in that process that you have, that's where violence erupts. And there have already been files where police officers were targeted for violence. And what I'm hoping to do is to let people know that not all police officers are the same. And there are, even amongst police officers, there are debates. Like you talked about earlier, you have some debates. And I don't want someone targeting police. No, let me rephrase that. I don't want people targeting police, but if someone is trying to target police, I want them to be aware that the person they're targeting might be someone that is trying to fight for their rights. I don't want them taking cheap shots at police. And I want them to understand that there are police officers out there that disagree with what's happening. There are police officers out there fighting. We've seen letters go out. We've seen police officers resign like yourself over what's happening because police officers refuse to participate in what they see. And I think it's important to remind people, even police officers, that police officers can be given a lawful order and police officers can still lawfully refuse to abide by that order because they have discretion. And if they're, boots on the ground, they have a very good understanding of the situation. If they've been given a lawful order, but they understand once they're on the ground, that lawful order is not ethical or moral, the police officer has discretion as to what they do next. So I really want to, kind of put that message out there to everybody and really try to prevent any sort of violence from breaking out or immoral and unethical activity.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I've tried to express a similar sentiment in a similar way, because probably 2 or 3 interviews in, I was talking about how I was so opposed to this. One of the fears that creeped into my head was, what if a member gets hurt because someone listened to what I said and decides to do something? And I was like, oh my God, like that was just like a terrifying thought. Like, I have to make sure I address that, right? Like peaceful, respectful, non-compliance, right? And if you're going to engage in that, have a plan, know when to walk away, like know what you're going to say. If you're challenged, know when your walk away point is. We don't push it to the point where you're going to get into a physical altercation with someone, whether it be a civilian or a police officer. Like have that walk away point in your mind, like rehearsed almost, so that you know when to be like, okay, I've made a stand. I've stood up for my rights, my freedoms, and now it's time to back off before this escalates into something more dangerous.
Exactly. And that doesn't mean giving up. That just means you realize that position right now, you've kind of done all you can in that moment, and it's time to back away and approach it from a different angle at a different time. That's
right. Yeah. And, and hopefully it has an impact on the person that you're engaging with, right? Like, hopefully that police officer walks away saying, like, man, that guy, he had some pretty legitimate arguments, and he was peaceful, he was respectful, and ultimately nothing bad happened, right? Like, hopefully you have an impact, a positive impact on that police officer or even that other civilian that you're engaging with, as opposed to validating the stereotype that we're all a bunch of loose cannons and that we're extremists and that we're, people to be feared, right? People to be feared just because we're out and walking around in society, right? Like me breathing is dangerous to other people just because I haven't taken the injection, right? Like it's such a weird thing to even hear myself say that, right? Like we've never behaved like that before. And now it's like people see it everywhere. One topic I do want to make sure that we address, I think it's very important for the both of us. I know we've discussed it many, many times, but before we start going off in different directions and before it leaves my head, is we've talked a lot about our concern about how the narrative is really, and the health measures that have been put in place, I guess specifically probably more like the health passports and the vaccine mandates for employment, have really driven a wedge between the population, right? Like it's created a segregated society, which has now become, it seems like, ever increasingly discriminatory. And I know that's something that we've talked about and expressed a lot of concern about. So I'd just like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely been a big concern of mine. It's just funny how at the start of this, we were all, help thy neighbor. We're all helping each other out. People from all walks of life were coming together to help each other through all this. And somewhere along the line, a great division started happening. And I know in my own household, my wife and I, we had a differing opinion. It caused a lot of stress. And it got pretty scary at one point where I'm like, is she going to leave me? Luckily, we were able to communicate on a level and, build on that relationship, and it's stronger than it was at that moment, thank God. But I've lost so many friends. I've had family members that don't want to talk to me. It's really created quite the divide. For example, I know someone, I worked with them before, very kind person, very kind. They would, take their take everyone out for lunch at work. They would find very meaningful gifts for everybody at Christmas. And their parting words to me were, knowing full well, I've got a wife and kid that I have to support, was enjoy your unpaid leave. Don't ever talk to me again. And I think in that moment, I realized just how deep of a divide there was in our society, where someone that was so kind, so thoughtful before would hit that level where they're telling me to enjoy, looking for an income, and that they never want to hear from me again, because I had a different belief of the situation than they did. So, yeah, and I mean, I've always spoken out about against stuff like this. Unfortunately, before there was COVID, there was division in society against, it seemed like, the community and police, and there was racial things being talked about. And it just seems like there always seems to be something, especially in the news, trying to divide us. And I think it's just very important for everyone to remember that we all have, there's common ground. We can find common ground with everybody. And there is a way through this. And looking for segregation and divide in that us versus them doesn't lead to positive growth. It just leads to destruction. So you really got to find a way to work on the common goals, especially when we're talking about the COVID response. We all have common goals here. We all, at the end of the day, want to get through this and want to be better off on the other side of this COVID response. So I think that's important to remember. And then the passports, I got to say, I'm still having a really hard time wrapping my head around that one. The discrimination and segregation that's seen for people that don't have passports. And I want to say, even people that have both shots, I think as of right now, you're considered fully vaccinated if you have 2 shots. And I know people that have 2 shots and they refuse to prove it because they too see that it's discriminatory and it's against our charter. And I'm sure we'll get to our charter shortly here. But just on the divide, I think it's very interesting that we've had all these talks before about divides in races and, the stereotypes that would happen, and how we often look at examples from the US. In Canada, we look down to the US a lot. And we often hear about what it was like to be a Black person, Southern states, say 60 years ago, and it was full of segregation. And we look at that, and we haven't had levels of segregation in Canada, to my knowledge, like we do now, like ever before, where we have people that aren't allowed in restaurants. They're not allowed to be in waiting rooms of medical centers. They have to wait outside. They're not allowed to have employment in certain places. They not only will they be sent away from their job, but they won't be paid, and they're not allowed to apply for EI. So again, I just think it's something to ask questions about, and really ask the question, is this the best way forward? Is there a better way?
is all of the progress that we've been working for as a nation and as a society to try and make everything as equal as possible, equal opportunity for everyone as possible, just completely tossed out the window in the matter of a few months, just because some arbitrary date passed in Ontario in September, right? You had healthcare workers working the entire time. A lot of the ones who chose not to take it were likely dealing with COVID patients. I would suspect a good number of them had COVID, recovered, strong, robust, natural immunity. And yet they're still being discriminated against and pushed out just because that September, I think it was September 22nd came and you're no longer welcome. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, even with that, now we're seeing where some healthcare workers are allowed back at work who are testing positive for COVID, yet people that are healthy at home, willing to work, are not being allowed at work. And I mean, that's just really telling of, the segregation and what's causing that segregation. Like, what's the difference between the two of them? One is unhealthy, technically, according to the test, and allowed to be at work. The other is healthy and not allowed to be at work. And maybe I should give some context why I was bringing up Black people in the United States and segregation. I'm actually part of a diversity committee, trying to get on a couple committees now. I'm on one of them. It's a Black equity working group that's supposed to help Black people in the RCMP. And it's hard for me to sit on that committee right now, because I look at what we're fighting for to make things more equitable for Black RCMP members. And I feel like, a king wanting more rights when there's almost peasants that aren't allowed anything. When I look at people that don't have a job right now, they don't have an income, they're not allowed into restaurants, they're not allowed anywhere. I just think, how can I be fighting for more rights with this group when there's another group that needs our help more right now? They need a lot of help, and I really wish, as a group, we could focus our attention on bringing those other people up to our level, and then we could all just work forward from there, instead of, again, having more segregation and trying to move this one group I'm a part of up while leaving another group behind.
Yeah, man. I mean,
it's just
I'm just trying to find the right words.
Yeah.
We've gone so far backwards from where we had been working towards as a collective society to make, I'll treat you with dignity, you treat me with dignity. Doesn't matter if we look the same, doesn't matter what background, religion, what ethnicity, even what our thoughts are on medical issues, right? Like, you treat me with dignity, I treat you with dignity. If I feel like I'm a threat to you, I will do something about that, right? Like, it's not callousness, this choice that I've made, right? Like, and many of us have made, right? It's not because I don't care about other people, right? If I really believe this was the answer, like I would have participated. Right? Like, I mean,
Yep.
I've been, you, me, many others like us, put ourselves in dangerous situations, often protect people we didn't even know. Right? And without even thinking, like, that's when I felt the best about my job. Right? Like, everyone knows that I was actively involved in supporting protection of the Prime Minister. I took that job seriously. I tried to be a professional about it, but when I really felt good about myself was when I was dealing with a high risk situation and trying to make it safe for the community, right? Like that was
Absolutely.
that's what I joined ERT to be, right?
Yeah.
So I think, we're going to talk about like the actually, before I forget, just similar sentiment. And to kind of put not just focus on the negative, but the positive that has come out of this as well, is like, I had an inner circle here in my local community. Some have been very supportive. A lot have gone completely silent, no excommunicado. And actually, there's even a couple that won't even look at me when I see them in public now. I mean, hockey is all shut down right now, but that's when I would always have this overlap with some of these people. And, I wasn't afraid to look them in the eye. And yet they would just walk right by and almost, try and make it appear as though they didn't even notice that I was there. And these were people that I had pretty good relationships with before. So I mean, that's some of the damage that has been done, right? I mean, I'm quite fortunate with the family support, both from people who have chosen my path and who have chosen to take their primary series, but unwilling to let it divide us. And I don't know though, like I'm at a point right now, like, I don't know if I can continue living where I'm living, even if we get our freedom back. You know what I mean? Like it will never be the same, right? Some of those relationships,
I understand that.
Some of those relationships will never be the same. I'm not gonna be a jerk to anyone, but I won't hide it, right? Like,
yeah,
I'll be honest with them. Like, look, our relationship will never be the same, and that's it, right? Anyways, not to dwell on that too much. On the plus side, because of the stance I've taken, and especially since kind of coming out into the public sphere and speaking out against the mandates and the discrimination, I have made, for every friend I've lost, I've probably made 5. And people that are great. Just, a lot of gratitude, and also just that relief that people were feeling so isolated before and so afraid to speak their mind because they were worried about being the other, right? And being labeled with all these hateful names that we had touched on earlier. And just being able to speak freely amongst each other without like self-censoring your speech to avoid conflict with your social circle. It's been very good. So my inner circle isn't it isn't what it was entirely, but it's quickly been backfilled, and probably in a greater volume of people. Anyways, sorry. Moving on. I think right now the biggest issue obviously is this idea that that has been put out by the federal minister, Mr. Duclos, and about the possibility of working with provinces to make it mandatory, even just to be a citizen. And then, quickly you see it happen in Quebec, where they're going to administer a tax on people who don't take it for a medical reason. To me, that's a gross violation of every fundamental right under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Like, so many of them have been violated already without any evidence provided and any healthy debate within our parliaments and our legislatures to justify it. But that one would, we know that it cannot be made mandatory in Canada because of our Constitution being the supreme law of Canada. So, I mean, in my mind, that would mean you would have to amend the Constitution. So I think I'm concerned about that, but I also think like that is such a huge thing to do that I think that we would have enough resistance within our elected officials to prevent that from happening. Maybe not at the leadership level, but within the party, it definitely seems to be there is a trend of people that are starting to become a little bit more vocal, speaking out about it. I just would like to get your thoughts on that, like your thoughts on the violation of our fundamental freedoms, and also like why do you think it is that I won't say so few people, but why do you think it is that people are having a difficult time seeing it through our perspective? And for me, it seems so obvious to do what I'm doing. Even though I tried to give it like a fair shake, right, at looking at both sides of the argument, but now I can't unknow what I know. I can't unsee what I've seen, and it just seems so obvious for me to have taken this path. But there's a lot of people out there, even the ones that have been supportive, I think, are still struggling with. I wonder why he's making such a big deal out of this. So, sorry, two different questions. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the violation of the charter, especially with this possibility of mandatory vaccination just to be a citizen. And then also, why do you think it is that people struggle with seeing it from our perspective?
Okay, let's start with the struggle to see it. And that is a very good question that I struggle with still. And the best kind of answer I can come up with is, have you ever seen that video where you're supposed to count how many times the ball is passed by the team wearing the white shirts? So I'll try and describe, there's two
Is that
teams.
the gorilla?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you haven't seen it, spoiler alert, there's a gorilla there. But for those who haven't seen it, I'll just describe the video. So the point of the video is to watch how many times the team in the white passes the ball. And you're supposed to go into that thinking that is, you're only getting to get one shot at getting this right. You need to know how many times the team passed the ball. And you're going to be asked at the end of the video, how many times the team passed the ball. So many people are so focused on how many times the ball's passed that they don't see in this video a gorilla walks to the middle of the screen, does a little dance, and then walks back off. And the whole point is my understanding is the whole point of that video is to show that when some people are so concentrated on one thing, they miss the other things that are going on around them, even if it's right in front of their face. So I think as a sniper, we're very unique in the policing world. Most police officers are in the thick of it. They're right in the action. They gotta watch their own back. They're confronting issues head on, and they're trying to kind of wrestle with that problem right in front of them. As a police sniper, we are removed from the actual situation that's happening, and we almost have a bird's eye view sometimes if we're on a building. That allows us not only to see what's happening in that incident or that situation, but what's on the periphery of that situation. What isn't directly involved, but might be involved shortly. So if we're watching Prime Minister Trudeau and there's protesters showing up, we might be able to see, okay, there's not too many protesters with him right now, but we can see a couple blocks out and we can see there's more people coming. We're able to see the bigger picture and we're able to anticipate what's coming next. And I think for me, being a sniper just helped me retrain my brain a bit, because on the sniper course and definitely when I started being active on files as a sniper, one of my biggest problems was I kept going too close. I wanted to be part of the action, and I had to they had to keep correcting me. No, you need to think of it differently now. You're not up there with the action. Your job is to protect the team by having a better overall understanding of what's happening outside of the initial incident. So when we relate this to COVID, the COVID response, I think my brain was also kind of trained at, okay, everyone's really focused on COVID, the numbers. What else is happening that maybe we're missing? So I took a step back, I guess, mentally, and just started looking at other things. And this kind of, I think, leads into the other question of the charter rights, is I noticed a lot of inconsistencies with what we've been taught about the charter and charter rights in our country and what we were seeing happen around Canada. Now, I think the absolute most important person in Canada today is the Honorable Brian Peckford. And if you can get him podcast, I think he would be like the best guest to have. First of all, not a lot of people know what the charter is, what the charter rights and freedoms are. And so I guess we can start with that. Like you said, Canada Constitution Act is the supreme law in Canada. And within the Constitution Act is the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That's what allows us to be free in Canada. That's what allows us to have, practice what religion we want, to go where we want in the country, to exercise, like our freedoms are from that. And I mean, common sense says we can't have absolute freedom. If someone wants to go murder someone, no, we can't allow that. We actually have to have some things set in place to protect other people. So the charter actually says that there are limitations on the freedoms you have, and that the government can impose more limitations if necessary. And I think the words they use are demonstrably justified. Is that
yeah.
So Section 1 of the charter allows limitations on our freedoms, but in order for the government to do that, I believe the words are, it must demonstrably justify that it's necessary to do that. But this is again why I say Brian Peckford would be just an amazing guest to have, because he is the expert on this. So for those of you that don't know, Brian Peckford is the last remaining person alive that helped co-write the charter. He's a very good speaker. He's very good at explaining, what the process was for writing the charter, the obstacles that they had, and he talks about what the meaning of everything was. A lot of our laws, we don't have the privilege of having people around that wrote some of those laws and can explain exactly what they meant. We still have Brian Peckford, and he is the go-to person right now who should be consulted for everything regarding the charter. And Brian Peckford has made it abundantly clear from numerous public appearances that what the mandates are doing, the vaccine passports, the restrictions on people's freedoms, is a direct violation of the charter. Now, this is coming from Brian Peckford. If there is a more credible person that we could ask for an opinion of the charter, or to ask what the charter actually means, I don't know who that is. So I'm listening to Brian Peckford on this. When he's saying this is a breach of the charter, that's what I'm going on.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate. I've been linked in with a group that he's the chair of, takingbackourfreedoms.ca. So I've actually had the opportunity to be face-to-face on Zoom with him multiple times now. And it's amazing, man. Like, he gives a whole breakdown on the history of it, like how it came to be, how they had to, I won't do it justice, but essentially, like you said, Section 1, if that's what we're operating under to try and justify this violation of so many people's fundamental rights and freedoms, even those who have taken the series, the primary series, but they continue to be forced to stay home, wear masks, businesses being closed and not allowed to operate, people's children not participating at in-school learning. Within Section 1, he talks about 4 tests, like you said, demonstrably justified. So he for cost benefit analysis has to be shown and proven by law. So possibly new law passed in legislature, reasonable limits. And as we've seen, right, the goalpost keeps changing. It appears now, despite in a major surge in infection, hospitalization, even ICU admission in people who have taken it, are it appears as though they're still pushing closer and closer toward that. It's almost like they want that 100% vaccination rate. And then within the context of a free and democratic society, like, well, wouldn't that mean that people would actually have to be given the opportunity to debate the issue, right? As opposed to like shutting down Parliament and trying to make all of these, well, I guess I would refer to them as like executive decisions without allowing the democracy to do its job to see if that's what is the best interest of the entire nation. So yeah, I would 100% agree with you on that. Like, he was there when it was drafted. He can even speak to like the mindset of some of the different premiers that were involved. That's like, you know, why they worded things specifically they did to give it some more teeth, right? Some more strength. He talks about like the reason it's in the Constitution is to give it permanence. So like these are values that Canada will be founded on and will remain permanent within our free and democratic society. So sorry, I just had to flip through my notebook here because I actually wrote that down the last time I heard him speak about it.
Yeah, so like I said, he'd be a great guest to have on. And yeah, a lot of Canadians don't understand what the charter is. And the other thing is, in a democracy, I know we kind of sit back, I'm guilty of it too. We kind of sit back and we're like, well, we have elected leaders, they're going to sort this out. But a democracy is participation back and forth. And, you know, we're supposed to be holding those people accountable. We're supposed to be asking these questions. And if no one's asking them the questions, you know, can we really blame them for deciding to go in whatever direction they want? So again, that comes back to the communication and the transparency.
Yeah, 100%. Like I'm guilty of it too. Like a vote, yes, but pretty apathetic. I think, is that the term, apathetic, when it comes to like, you know, my interest in what the political system is doing? Oh,
yeah.
Lesson learned. Now,
yeah, we've got to change.
yeah. Lesson learned. All right. So, what do you think, or what are your thoughts on what can more people do? That's a question I get asked all the time. You know, what can we do? What can we do? So, you know, from civilians and even police officers. I mean, that's our world, right? Like that's our wheelhouse, our area of expertise. From an active police officer standpoint, what do you think is our way out of this as a population?
Yeah. So first of all, I think a lot of people see this as just a vaccine issue. And some people, I'm off work right now. I don't think I said that earlier today. I'm currently off work on stress leave. And there was a bunch of things that contributed to that stress. And just a short story, it actually got to the point where on my sniper qualifications, the only way I could pass them, I was actually physically shaking. My hands were shaking. And as a sniper, you don't want, you know, your whole body shaking. And just from the stress, you know, my hands were shaking, body was shaking. I couldn't go behind the gun and have it still. So the only way I was actually able to pass my qualifications on the last one was to do this weird shooting technique where I basically didn't touch the gun at all, except for, you know, my trigger finger, and the gun was completely wrapped up in a bag. And I remember I shot it and I looked back and there was a gunsmith looking at me and he's just like, what was that? And, you know, I kind of just said, oh, you know, I tried something new today, but I couldn't pass it with my face touching the gun, with my whole hand on the gun, because the amount of stress. So I'm off work right now. And a lot of people have thought that I'm off work because of vaccine hesitancy, I think they're calling it, or it has to do with the vaccine. But I don't want to say the vaccine has nothing to do with it, or the COVID shot has nothing to do with it. But I really think it's more like the tip of the iceberg. So you might see a COVID shot and think, okay, this is what the issue is, but there's much more underneath that you're not seeing. So if you were to look at people right now and you're asking yourself, okay, why is everybody going off work? Why are doctors and nurses that worked, they were in school for years, they have great jobs. Why are they willing to sacrifice all of that for this right now? Why over this injection? If those are kind of the questions you're asking, then what you can do after this interview is learn more. You're kind of asking the wrong questions. There's more to this than what's going on. Like we talked about the charter for one, the discrimination and segregation in society. So for those of you, if this is very new to you, or you still think that this is all just about, someone getting a vaccine or not, what you can do is start doing more homework, start looking into this more. The Canadian COVID Care Alliance, like Danny said, was a great resource. Danny has posted lots of other great sites to check out. There's Action for Canada. I think it's the Brownstone Institute, I think was one of them there, Danny. Mounties for Freedom is another one. So start looking at that stuff and just educate yourself. If you're someone that's, you've already educated yourself on this, start conversations, start having conversations with the people next to you. Ask them, what they think of what's going on. Have some debates. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't think that because someone has a different opinion than you, that it has to be hostile, that you can't talk. Just be open to have that discussion. And don't go into the discussion trying to convince anyone of your side. Just have that discussion knowing that you're there to learn where the other person's coming from, and that you can, if things are getting heated, walk away from the discussion, have it again another day, or don't. Have it with someone else, but just start having those conversations. If you're someone that's already having those conversations, I think you're at a point where you can start questioning things now. If you don't agree with what's happening right now, talk to your elected officials, question them, and demand answers. Because in a democracy, like we keep talking about, there is transparency, and elected officials are supposed to answer to you and get you the answers that you're asking for to your questions. So start questioning things and ask for those answers. And I don't care what side you're on. I don't care if, to you, the COVID injections are God's gifts to man. I don't care if you think they're poison. But I encourage you either way to ask questions and seek answers. And that goes for the workplace as well. If you're at a place in a workplace where you're following orders from a supervisor, if those orders don't seem right based on the information you have, start asking questions, start demanding answers, because you need to be accountable to your own actions. And I think this kind of carries over to police. What I would say to police, follow all those other steps, but on top of that, you have discretion. And at the end of the day, if you have a lawful order, you can still lawfully not carry out that order if there are ethical or moral reasons that you feel you shouldn't be doing those. And don't be afraid of that. It's much better to question a situation than do something that you think is wrong, is wrong, or that, you would much rather find out later you questioned a situation than you carried it out and it ended up being wrong. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my advice to people is, not everyone can take the same action right now. We're all at different places, and we've all got to start from where we are and just keep building up from there.
Yeah, that's great, Rich. I think something that we kind of touched on it earlier on the civilian side. I encourage people to, if you feel like something's wrong, it's time to speak up, like you said, right? To your friends, to your family, to your elected officials. You can be respectful about it, and you're not trying to impose your beliefs on others. You're just trying to help them understand why you are where you're at,
Yes.
and why our fundamental freedom and individual choice is so crucial to the maintenance of our democracy as we know it, right? Like, I fear that if the Constitution was to change, or where even where the passports now become a permanent thing, or the vaccine becomes mandatory just to remain a citizen, and if you refuse, you're either, you know, punished somehow, or, you know, God forbid, you know, actually physically forced to take it. That's when I would pivot to law enforcement and say, how far is this going to go before you stand up to it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I know many people have expressed, you know, I've talked about the line in the sand. I've had many people express to me, like, if they try and force this on people, I'm done, or I will not participate, right? Like that's not what I signed up. When I joined the RCMP, that's not what I signed up for. And so just yesterday, I had a member reach out to me that we've crossed paths before, but we don't know each other well. And even though he's in a different position than me, you know, status wise and active serving, he was expressing like his support for me speaking out and some of his own concerns about what's happening. And he asked, like, if there's anything I can do, you know, just let me know. And I said, use your discretion. Don't enforce something that you believe is an unjust restriction, right? Or an unjust regulation. I said, and if this gets to the point where it becomes mandatory, do the right thing and protect people, right? And my sense from his reply was like, yeah, 100%. Like,
Good.
I'm not enforcing this nonsense, and I will definitely take that stand if it needs to happen. And so that fills me with encouragement, right? Like, when
Good. Yeah.
you know, a lot of people have expressed fear about getting rounded up, you know, and I often say, like, look, no matter how bad it feels right now, I still have enough faith in our police in this country that would be way too far for them, right? Like, even the people
Yeah.
who are very strong in their belief that the COVID shots are safe and effective, I still believe even they would have enough integrity and courage to say, no way. Like, no, that's a no-go. Like, we've seen where that leads in history, and that's a no-go. So I try and ease their fear with those comments. Anything else? Any last thoughts or anything that you'd like to share?
I don't know. This is a lot harder than I thought to kind of be on the spot talk and remember everything that, you know, you wanted to mention, or, you know, I wanted to mention in this, but no, I think we covered everything. Or maybe just a reminder to people that I know it's been talked about in the Mounties for Freedom stuff, but the 1996 immunization report of Canada says that immunizations can't be made mandatory because of the Canadian Constitution. So that's in a Government of Canada report. And yeah, actually on Mounties for Freedom, the letter on the Mounties for Freedom website, there is a letter addressed to Commissioner Brenda Lucki. Now, I've read the letter, and I would encourage everybody, everybody to read the letter, but RCMP members to read the letter. I'm not saying you have to support it. I'm not saying you have to sign it. But in keeping with the theme of understanding where some people are and where people are coming from, I think if you read that letter addressed to Commissioner Brenda Lucki, you will have an understanding of what's going through the heads of some active members right now within the RCMP across the whole country. So yeah, that's I think that's everything I wanted to say.
Yeah, and that letter is, it's like, it's all cited, right? All the reference material is there. So again, it's very, very evidence-based. It's not just police officers and their opinions. There's all kinds of evidence attached to back up all of the claims that are made in that letter, the claims and the concerns that are expressed in that letter.
Yeah.
There's also a letter addressed to our Attorney General. And there's a couple of, I mean, the videos that I've been a part of are there. Plus there's also a couple of blogs as well to bring people's attention to. If they've never seen the website, it's Mounties freedom.com. And then you can also follow us on the different social media platforms that Mounties for Freedom is on the go with as well. Most notably Instagram, Telegram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Yeah,
All right.
and Danny, thank you for keeping Mounties for Freedom alive there and putting your face everywhere, because that is definitely something that keeps me going, checking in on Mounties for Freedom, and it wouldn't be where it is today without you. So thank you for that.
Well, there's a lot of great people that are working behind the scenes. So I'm just the face and name that most people know. But thank you, Richard, for having the guts to do this and for backing me up publicly. That's
Absolutely.
That's oh, you're gonna get me all emotional. It's it's very meaningful for me to have that kind of public support from people, you know, within the ERT program and the RCMP as a whole. So, oh, here we go.
Anytime.
Thanks, man. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And
same to you.
Stay strong, stay free.
Awesome. Thanks. You too. Bye.